World Championship Wrestling may have given a lot of people work. I think there are approximately 400 people on the roster during the height of the Monday Night Wars, but the company sure weren't shy about telling people to hit the bricks either. Sometimes these firings could be touchy subjects, either because of the supposed indiscretion that caused the dismissal, or because the person who suddenly found themselves without a regular paycheck hadn't actually done anything wrong in the first place. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most controversial WCW firings. Join us. Number 10, Dustin Rhodes and the Blacktop Bully. A twofer to kick us off, as both Dustin Rhodes and the Blacktop Bully, aka Twisted Trucker Barry Darsow, were canned because of the same incident. Hell, even backstage agent Mike Graham got caught in the crossfire and suffered in the fallout from the pair's nutty King of the Mountain match from the uncensored '95 pay-per-view. The object of this novel contest was to fight your way from the back of a moving semi-truck to the front of it and then blow a horn. Not being funny, but they probably should have just fired whoever came up with the match concept instead. Anyway, the two men had their match, during which they both bladed. According to a report, Graham had instructed both to get colour and may have even provided the blades for them to do so. Unfortunately, WCW had a no-blood policy at the time, and all three were let go for it. However, the match didn't air live, but was really filmed days in advance. Not only that, but the blood was de-emphasized in the editing and wasn't referenced on commentary. Many within WCW believed the three were made scapegoats because WCW were under orders from Turner execs to slash their wage bill, and this gave management an excuse. Number 9, the British Bulldog. The Ultimate Warrior's fleeting WCW run was, all told, a complete and utter disaster on every conceivable level. His debut promo went on for about 3 hours longer than scheduled, the segments he was involved in were naff, and his big return match with Hulk Hogan was one of the worst in history. There was also collateral damage from Warrior's run, as Davey Boy Smith seriously injured his back while taking a bump on the trapdoor built into the ring for the Warrior at Fall Brawl 98. Fast forward 6 months, and the British Bulldog, who hadn't wrestled since sustaining the injury, was in hospital with a potentially career-ending, if not life-threatening, spinal infection. While Smith was being fed through an IV and coming to grips with being told that he may have to use a wheelchair for the rest of his days, WCW decided to FedEx him his termination papers. Callously taking advantage of a 90-day injury clause in his contract, the company informed Davey Boy, who had 2 years left on his deal, that he was jobless. After realizing they had a potential lawsuit on their hands, WCW continued to send Smith paychecks afterwards, while Eric Bischoff claimed to not know the severity of Smith's situation. Number 8, Ric Flair. Despite being one of the company's best in-ring performers and a genuine drawing card, WCW's then president Jim Herd wanted rid of Ric Flair when the two parties were renegotiating the Nature Boys contract in the summer of 1991. Herd not only wanted Flair to cut his famous mop of hair, don an earring, and change his name to Spartacus, no, really, he also wanted the reigning WCW World Heavyweight Champ to take a substantial pay cut. This was a deal worth between $700,000 and $750,000 to one that would pay $350,000 and then $250,000 over the next 2 years. Naturally, Slick Rick didn't go for all that, and 2 weeks before he was scheduled to defend his title against Lex Luger in the main event of the Great American Bash pay-per-view, Herd fired him and vacated the title. That allowed Flair to negotiate with WWE and led to the famous scene where he showed up on WWE television with the big gold belt, which he was in possession of and entitled to keep as he had never been paid back a deposit, proclaiming himself to be the real world's champion. This in turn resulted in a lawsuit between WCW and the Fed, which was later dropped. Number 7, Syxx. In October of 1997, Syxx, who had previously wrestled for WWE as 1-2-3 Kid, was sidelined with a serious neck injury which he subsequently underwent surgery for. While Sean Waltman was on the shelf, the backstage situation between Eric Bischoff and Waltman's close friends Kevin Nash and Scott Hall was seriously deteriorating. Then, in March of 1998, Shawn received a FedEx package containing his marching orders and immediately suspected it was Eazy-E trying to send a message to his Click running buddies. Syxx was just months away from being able to return to the ring and had a year and a half remaining on his contract at the time. Many of the wrestlers in WCW, even those that didn't especially like Waltman, felt bad for him and believed it was messed up to release a guy who was out hurt with an injury sustained in a WCW ring. Years later, Bischoff would contend that Waltman, while a good performer when sober, wasn't sober often enough and was lucky to even have a job considering his inconsistency. In any event, Waltman immediately signed with WWE as X-Pac and joined the rebooted D-Generation X. Suck it, Eric! Number 6, Raven. Like many on the WCW roster in the summer of 1999, Raven was miserable. And boy did he let everybody know it too, publicly complaining about his lot during a radio interview. Shortly after, in a morale-boosting meeting where he basically went after half the wrestlers for this and that, Eric Bischoff called Raven out for his comments and said that if he was so unhappy, he could have his release. Our man Scott immediately accepted, got up and walked out of the meeting. Having called Bischoff's bluff, Raven spoke with WCW's lawyer about obtaining his release and was told that he had a 90-day no-compete clause. Raven pointed out that Bischoff had offered him a full release, but Eazy-E had apparently changed his tune. He ultimately let Raven go on the condition that he didn't sign with WWE for the remainder of his WCW contract, which was about 10 months. Bischoff later tried to talk the former WCW US champion into staying, but Raven's mind was made up and he headed back to ECW until he could legally negotiate with WWE. Conan, Rey Mysterio, and Billy Kidman also approached Bischoff about getting their releases following the meeting, but he refused their requests. Number 5, Juventud Guerrera. WCW wrestlers getting off their rockers during overseas tours was nothing new. Arn Anderson, Sid Vicious, Scissors, and so on. But Juventud Guerrera caused quite the international incident when the promotion visited Australia in September of 2000. After an evening of partying at a Brisbane nightclub, the Juice went berserk and had a full-on drug-induced rage which involved him stripping naked, throwing chairs, screaming obscenities, and threatening to kill himself. Right next to the hotel restaurant, by the way, at 10:30 in the morning. When WCW wrestlers and hotel patrons were unable to subdue Guerrera, police were called and the former cruiserweight champion was maced, restrained, and carried off to jail, clips of which aired on the local news that night. Juventud, who had been taking ecstasy and is believed to have smoked some marijuana that he didn't know was laced with PCP, was fined $3,500 by the court. Worst news was to follow, however, as the luchador was sent home and duly fired, costing him a lot more money in the long run. Some reports contend that Juvi only found out about his release when he read about it online. I mean, I would dismiss such reports as far-fetched, but, you know, WCW. Number 4, William Regal. On the February 9th, 1998 edition of Monday Nitro, William Regal became the latest victim of Goldberg's winning streak. However, this was not the straightforward spear and jackhammer job that had beaten just about everybody else to that point. Nope, this was an awkward 5-minute encounter where a clearly inexperienced Goldberg's shortcomings were badly exposed. Just a few weeks later, Regal was given his pink slip. Some theorized that the battling Brit had purposely gone out of his way to make the upstart look bad, but that was not the case. Per Regal's own account, he and Goldberg had gone over the match with an unnamed agent backstage and everything had been approved. Unfortunately, when the two were out in front of the live crowd, Goldberg failed to make his comebacks or take openings as planned, despite repeated instruction from Regal to do so. Since Goldberg was a star on the rise and Regal was a solid hand on the downswing, he took the fall. To this day, Goldberg bears a grudge and believes that Regal was trying to take advantage of a green rookie on live TV. Would a real man's man really do something like that, Bill? Number 3, Ricky Steamboat. There were few members of the WCW locker room who were more respected than Ricky Steamboat. A former NWA World's Heavyweight Champion, Steamboat was considered a model professional who conducted himself with the utmost class both between the ropes and outside the ring. The Dragon was still going strong in the summer of 1994 and was booked to defeat Steve Austin for the United States title at the 28th Clash of the Champions TV special. Unfortunately, Steamboat slipped backwards off the middle turnbuckle during the bout and landed awkwardly, seriously injuring his back. Ricky actually worked the next 4 nights, defending his newly won title against Austin on house shows, but the injury turned out to be a career ender. While sitting at home and weighing up his options that November, Steamboat received a FedEx from WCW letting him know that they were exercising their right to terminate his contract, which only had 2 months left to run on it. Needless to say, this upset Ricky and he sued them for wrongful termination and never did end up returning to WCW in any capacity before the promotion closed in 2001. Number 2, Steve Austin. 8 months after Steamboat was fired for having the gall to get injured on the job, his opponent during his final WCW match also found himself sidelined with a triceps tear suffered during a WCW-sanctioned tour with New Japan. As Stunning Steve recalls, he was at home convalescing when Eric Bischoff called him to let him know that based on the amount of money they were paying him and the amount of time he had been incapacitated, they were exercising their right to terminate their agreement. He got his papers via FedEx shortly after. Pissed off as old Stone Cold was, and as controversial as the firing may have been on the surface, there was more to the story. Shortly before Bischoff had called him, WCW's head honcho had received word from Tony Schiavone that he had overheard Austin telling his then-wife Jeannie to tell him that he wasn't there when Schiavone had called attempting to get him to come to a TV taping to cut some promos. Many years after the fact, Austin conceded that he understood why Bischoff let him go, even though it sucked and he was bitter about it at the time. Number 1, Bret Hart. To say that Bret Hart's 3-year run in WCW was a disappointment would be a major understatement. There were flashes of brilliance here and there, sure, but on the whole it greatly underwhelmed. What's worse, the Hitman's glittering in-ring career came to a sad limp end as a result of post-concussion issues stemming from his Starrcade 1999 match with Bill Goldberg. Less than a year later, on October 20th, 2000, then-Turner head Brad Siegel sent Bret Hart a letter letting him know that he was unemployed. While it's hardly a surprise that the financially struggling WCW would release Hart, given that he was a big earner, even if he was only making half of his guarantee due to being injured, it was still viewed as a heartless thing to do, considering the severity of the injuries which he had suffered while plying his trade for the promotion. Bret and WCW never clicked, but his unceremonious termination, coupled with the fact that he wasn't even offered a chance to make a farewell speech of any sort, ensured that the relationship between the two sides ended on a sour note.